At dinner, my father smirked. Your sister's the new owner of this property. You have 30 hours to get your things out. I smiled calmly, but when she tried to collect the keys, the bank notified her of the overdue payments I'd quietly stopped covering months ago. Collapsed. I should have known something was off when Dad set the table like it was Thanksgiving and not just a random Tuesday. He even pulled out the good silverware, the ones Mom only used when she thought someone important might show up. But it was just us. Or maybe they thought I was the important one this time. That was their first mistake. Hadn't been back to the house since. Grandpa died. Almost a year. I stayed away on purpose. There was no drama. I missed nostalgia pulling me back. Just obligation. My lawyer called and said I needed to sign a few final documents in my fringes, person to close the last chapter of the side of estate. I didn't even want to eat with them. But Dad insisted. Said it was the least I could do. I agreed mostly out of curiosity. The house looked exactly like I remembered. Pristine, polished, empty of warmth. Mom had kept it like a museum ever since Grandpa passed. But there were new touches. Claire's touches. A glass sculpture in the foyer. Some ridiculous faux marble mirror in the hallway. Scented candles that smelled like overpriced hotels. And the new Lexus in the driveway. She didn't even park in the street like a guest anymore. Dinner was awkward from the first minute. Claire and Darren sat on the far side of the table like they owned the place. Mom kept talking about how grown-up Claire was now, how she had such a good head for business. Dad chimed in, occasionally, but mostly stared at me, with that look he always wore when he was about to lecture me. I didn't engage. I listened. I waited. The meat was dry. The mashed potatoes were lumpy. The tension was undercooked. Then Dad folded his napkin and said it. Your sister's the new owner of this property. You have 30 hours to get your things out. Apology. No discussion. Claire didn't even pretend to be surprised. She just gave me that tight-lipped smile she used to wear when we were kids, and she'd snitch on me to Mom and get away with. Darren didn't say anything. Just raised his glass like they'd finally won something. I smiled. Calm, casual, like I didn't just watch 3 people try to erase me from my own history. Because, here's the thing. Grandpa didn't trust any of them. Not Dad, not Mom, definitely not Claire. That's why he left everything to me. The house, the land, the savings, all of it. He knew I'd protect it. And for a while, I did. I paid the taxes. I managed the mortgage, quietly handled the small debts he left behind. Nobody even noticed, because that's how they treated me, like I didn't exist unless they needed something. Last year, Claire came to me, crying, saying she wanted to help out with the property. Said she wanted to be more involved, that she finally appreciated the family legacy. I knew she was lying. But I played along. I let her think she was manipulating me, signed a few things, gave her just enough access to feel powerful. What she didn't know was that the moment she started spending Grandpa's money like it was hers, I started pulling out quietly, one by one. I stopped covering the payments, let the balances slip. The red letters pile up behind the dollar scenes, and I waited. I waited for the exact moment she'd think she won. That moment was now, and dinner was just getting started. The next morning, Claire, dressed like a CEO for the bank meeting she thought would solidify her new beginning. She wore heels she couldn't walk in, and a white blazer that still had the tag tucked under the sleeve. I could picture the way she probably strutted into that place like it was some victory lap. Darren, walking a step behind her, like her personal assistant, soaking in the imagined glow of sudden, wealth. They didn't tell me they were going. I only knew because I'd already arranged it. A week before that dinner, I had a quiet conversation with the bank. I informed them that as of the following month, I would no longer be covering the costs associated with the Ferris property. I revoked all automatic payments, canceled the maintenance contracts, and pulled back the umbrella insurance plan I'd kept under my name, mainly because I knew Claire would never think to get one. She didn't even know what half those things were. She saw a house and thought it came free of responsibility, like it just existed, handed down from heaven. But Grandpa didn't leave her a miracle. He left me a structure built over 60 years ago with a cracked foundation, a roof that needed replacing, and a mountain of deferred costs I'd been silently managing since he passed. That house wasn't a prize, who was a project, and I'd held it together for almost a year with no thanks from anyone. Walked into the bank that morning, expecting a ribbon-cutting ceremony. What she got instead was a file full of overdue payment notices, taxes, small liens tied to old repairs, and a warning that unless the balance of Nam, nearly $49,000, was settled immediately, the house would be placed under review for foreclosure proceedings. Darren apparently started arguing on the spot. He tried to convince the woman at the desk that it was all a mistake, that everything was taken care of. Claire, I heard, went dead quiet. I got the story, in pieces from the lawyer, from a friend at the bank, and eventually from the panicked string of missed calls and texts that started pouring in that afternoon. Claire called 4 times. Darren texted something snide, trying to play tough. My favorite was Mom's voicemail. Bella, I don't know what's going on, but your sister's at the bank, and they're saying things that don't make sense. Can you call me back? No concern, no warmth, just a mother calling because her golden child was upset, and she needed someone to clean it up. I didn't return the call. That evening, Claire finally got through to choir. Me. She didn't even say hello, just went straight into it, accusing me of setting her up, of hiding the real condition of self, the house, of letting her take the fall. I didn't argue. I just reminded her she'd wanted ownership. She'd pushed for it. She'd insisted. And she'd done it, with Dad's help, completely behind my back. If she didn't understand what ownership meant, that wasn't my problem. She hung up. That night, Claire posted a blurry picture of a glass of wine on Instagram, with some caption about betrayal and snakes in the grass. Comments flooded in, friends telling her to stay strong, strangers giving her advice. Meanwhile, the inbox from the county tax office was still flagged red. The overdue bills were still mounting. The insurance lapse notice was set to trigger a fine within 48 hours. By the next morning, my father called. He wasn't yelling yet, but the tone had shifted. It was the sound of a man who realized something might be spiraling out of his control. He asked me if there was any way I could pause things, maybe help stabilize the situation for now. I didn't bother pretending to think it over. I told him flatly that I wasn't involved anymore. His silence lasted a full 10 seconds before he said, "But this was your grandfather's home." Exactly. And I knew what Grandpa would have said if he saw what they were doing to it. Claire thought she'd snatched the crown, but what she inherited wasn't a throne. It was a collapsing kingdom with rotten walls and debt woven into every corner, and I wasn't going to be the one patching it up anymore. That was her job now, and she hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. By the end of that week, the panic had fully settled into their panic bones. Claire had gone from posting curated brunch photos to completely disappearing online. Darren's Facebook changed from obnoxious motivational quotes to total silence. And I started hearing from extended family members, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly reaching out with weirdly warm messages. Aunt Cheryl texted saying we should grab coffee soon. Uncle Leo sent a 2-line email asking how I'd been, holding up. No one mentioned the house, but I knew why they were circling. Word had spread. Claire had told them she was the new owner of Grandpa's estate. She must have bragged endlessly before that bank meeting, because now that the truth was leaking, everyone wanted to know what was really happening. But nobody asked directly. They just watched, waited, hoping to be included in whatever they thought was next. Worst of it hit when the contractor showed up. Back when Grandpa was still alive, he'd hired a local guy named Mark to do some foundation work. Halfway through the job, Grandpa had a medical emergency, and I ended up sorting out the paperwork. We'd worked out a payment plan, and I had been quietly sending monthly checks ever since. When I stopped 3 months before the dinner, Mark gave it a bit of time before coming to collect. And collect he did. He knocked on the front door on a Wednesday afternoon. Claire answered. I wasn't there, obviously, but I got the full story later. From a neighbor who still liked me more than the rest of my family. Said Mark showed up with paperwork. Firm reminder that there was still over $14,000 owed on structural work that had already been done. Darren tried to get loud, tried to push him off the property, but Mark was patient. He didn't yell. He just handed them the papers and said he'd be filing the lien by the end of the week. Called me again. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask if I was busy. She just launched into it, saying she didn't know about this contractor, that Grandpa must have made some kind of mistake that I had to have known. Why didn't you tell us? I asked her the same thing. Why? Didn't you ask me anything when you helped Claire take the house? Answer. Meanwhile, Claire was drowning with every new financial letter, every unexpected invoice. Her little empire started crumbling. She didn't have the money to cover the debt. And Darren's business, some sketchy crypto-flavored nonsense, had already been flailing. They started making calls. Darren called his dad. Claire called a college friend who once worked at a real estate office. Mom called her cousin in Florida who used to be a mortgage broker. Nobody wanted to help. Dad was the last to break. When he called me that Friday night, he wasn't angry anymore. He sounded tired, said maybe this was all a misunderstanding, asked if we could meet. I said no. Wasn't being cruel. I just didn't see the point. He'd picked his side months ago. He hung up without saying goodbye. By the end of the week, Claire was on the verge of losing the house entirely. Bank had started the paperwork. The lien was filed, and she still hadn't paid the property taxes, which meant the county was now involved. All of it had come crashing down faster than I expected, and yet they still hadn't figured out the full extent of what was coming. They hadn't even opened the letters from the HOA yet. The letter from the HOA had been sitting unopened for weeks, mixed in with pizza coupons and overdue utility bills. Claire hadn't even noticed it. That's how careless things had gotten. She didn't open any mail unless it looked like a check or a threat. But when she finally did, when her hands finally tore through that generic white envelope, everything she'd been trying to keep from collapsing came crashing down in a whole new way. The letter was brief but brutal. 3 violations: unauthorized structure in the backyard, non-compliant electrical modifications, and failure to submit any paperwork for architectural review. The violations were tied to Darren's latest idea of adding value to the property. A hideous hot tub he bought secondhand off some guy in a Facebook group, installed it himself with 0 permits, ran power from an outdoor outlet using some sketchy extension cords, and didn't tell a soul. Claire knew, of course. He just thought nobody would care that the HOA was lazy or wouldn't notice. They noticed the fine was already over $3,200, and if they didn't correct everything, remove the hot tub, concrete base Darren poured without measuring, and restore the lawn to its original state, the HOA would begin formal legal proceedings. Baker, board president, was the same woman Claire insulted at a neighborhood event 2 months ago. Loudly, publicly called her tacky for wearing off-brand shoes. I found all of this out from my old neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, who still called me occasionally to check in. She'd always liked me better than the rest of the family. She said it was obvious. Claire and Darren were in over their heads, and she mentioned that someone had been sneaking around the backyard with a flashlight at night, probably the HOA's hired inspector. By the time Claire reached out to me again, her voice was quieter, not calm, defeated. She didn't yell this time. She didn't accuse me of betrayal or call me a snake. She just asked if we could meet. Said she wanted to talk about the house that she was trying to figure out a solution. I agreed to meet her. I was curious what rock bottom sounded like. She chose a cafe just outside town, one of those trendy spots with recycled wood counters and slow drip coffee. I got there 10 minutes early. She was already waiting. Hoodie, messy hair, no jewelry. Her eyes looked different, smaller, like they'd been crying for days. We sat down and she didn't waste time. She started talking like someone confessing at a police station. Told me the whole story, the financial mess, the liens, the HOA, fines, and then something I didn't expect at all. He told me about the fund. Apparently, Grandpa had set up a second account years ago. A separate maintenance fund tied to the house. A cushion in case anything major happened. Only a few people knew about it. I didn't. But Claire found out through Dad. She convinced him to help her access it, claiming she needed it to fix a few things. In truth, she drained it dry within 2 months. A $6,000 shopping spree in LA. Alexis, a surprise birthday, vacation to Tulum for one of her influencer friends. Spa, memberships, designer clothes she couldn't pronounce. All paid for with money Grandpa set aside to keep the house standing. I sat there not saying much. Let her get it all out. She didn't cry, but she looked like someone who just realized that walls were actually closing in. And for once, there was no one left to blame. She said the words eventually. Do you want the house back? She said she'd sign it over. Said she couldn't handle it. Darren was already pulling away, staying out late, talking about maybe getting a fresh start somewhere else. My parents had gone radio silent after the HOA letter. The people who had backed her the hardest were now the same ones, demanding answers. Fix everything to come up with the money, to undo all the mess. But Claire didn't have anything left. No cash, no savings, no plan. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just told her I'd think about it. But here's what I didn't tell her. I already knew about the second fund. I found out 2 weeks ago. The bank flagged it when they were trying to trace payment history on the property. I'd already seen the list of transactions. Knew what she spent, where, and when. Knew exactly when. Darren's name started showing up on joint purchases. I'd just been waiting to see if she'd admit it. He finally did. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Grandpa left a third account, one that Claire didn't touch because it wasn't in any paperwork. It wasn't tied to the house. It was left under my name only, with one specific instruction, handwritten in a letter, received 3 months after his death. You'll know when it's time. And it was time. I waited a week before responding to Claire. Not out of spite. There was just no rush. She thought she was, dangling the house in front of me like a peace offering. But in reality, she was offering to dump a burning ship into my lap and run. I let her sit in that silence, let her wonder if I was going to swoop in and save her from the mess she created. During that week, things escalated fast. The bank filed their final notice. Darren tried to contest. The lien from the contractor failed. The HOA added another $900 in fines. I heard from Mrs. Jensen that Darren had been seen loading boxes into the back of a rented U-Haul in the middle of the business night. She said it looked like he was taking electronics, tools, and what she thought was one of the vintage dressers from Grandpa's old room. Claire was still living in the house. Oh no, my parents had finally stopped pretending. Me a single text. We didn't know everything. She lied to us too. Dad never reached out at all. I knew they were upset. Mostly because Claire had promised them the house would be theirs to grow old in. She even offered to build them a guest suite once renovations started. That was when she thought the inheritance fund was infinite, when she still believed money was just a matter of asking hard enough. But now she was broke. They were furious, and nobody was speaking to anyone. I showed up on a Sunday morning, didn't call ahead, just drove up the long driveway in my beat-up Honda, parked behind the Lexus that hadn't moved in 5 days, and rang the doorbell. Claire answered in pajamas. Her hair was greasy. Her eyes had that hollow look of someone who hadn't slept. I asked if I could take a walk through the house. She didn't stop me. The living room was a wreck. Empty wine bottles, mail, everywhere. Dust settling in corners. The kitchen was worse. Food in the sink, ants near the fridge. The hot tub in the backyard was still there, half drained and covered with a tarp weighed down by bricks. Darren's idea of problem solving. When I got to Grandpa's old study, I stopped. It was exactly how he left it, except for the smell. A faint trace of mildew. She hadn't touched anything. Probably didn't know what half the stuff in there was. His books, his collection of coins, his journals, and the old safe tucked behind the cabinet, the one Claire didn't even know existed. I opened it. Inside were some documents, a few letters, and a flash drive. I'd already gone through all of it before. That's how I found out about the third account. After Grandpa passed, I received a letter from a private law office, not the one Claire used. This was his own, separate from the family's usual legal contacts. The letter explained that he had created a separate fund accessible only by me. The eventual restoration or repossession of the house. It had sat untouched for saying nearly a year, quietly gaining interest, and now it was enough to cover everything, the liens, the taxes, even the HOA violations. I could clean the slate, but first, I needed Claire gone. I turned to her in the doorway, told her I'd take the house. She didn't even argue, just nodded, said she'd be out by the end of the week. I didn't believe her, and I was right. That night, a call from Mrs. Jensen. She saw Claire screaming at my mom in the driveway, something about money, about betrayal. Then Darren showed up, more yelling, boxes thrown, neighbors started filming. Finally, the cops came not to arrest anyone, but to stop the noise. 2 days later, Claire was gone. But what she left behind was worse than I imagined. Trash in every room, broken cabinet doors, a smashed mirror in the hallway, one of Grandpa's old chairs torn at the arm, like someone had tried to drag it and gave up halfway. And in the garage, an old mattress covered in ash. It looked like someone had been smoking there for weeks. She left the house, but not before trying to ruin it. Didn't matter, because now it was mine again. And she had no idea that I already had the money to bring it back. They left on a Thursday. No fanfare, no dramatic exit, just gone. Claire didn't call or even knock on my door to hand over the keys. Instead, she texted me 3 photos. One of the front hall, one of the kitchen, and one of the living room with a single word under it. Done. No punctuation, no apology. I stared at it for a moment, then closed the message and didn't reply. When I pulled up to the house, later that evening, the Lexus was gone. The blinds were crooked in every window. A black trash bag was torn open on the porch, as if someone had tried to drag it out and gave up halfway. They left the front door unlocked. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the air, stale, humid, and sour, somewhere between old laundry and spilled alcohol. It didn't smell like a home. It smelled like what was left after a party no one cleaned up. Lights were still on in half the rooms, ceiling fans spinning lazily, cabinet doors open like they'd packed in a rush. I didn't expect it to be spotless, but I didn't expect this either. Every room had damage. Nothing too expensive, just intentional, petty, light switches with cracked covers. A cigarette burn in the upstairs carpet. Someone had taken a marker to the inside of one of the kitchen drawers, and I've scrolled something I didn't bother reading. And in the garage, a busted television with shattered glass around it next to what looked like Darren's old weights, left behind like an afterthought. In the study, one of the ashes that Grandpa's framed certificates was lying on the floor. The glass cracked. I picked it up and set it back on the 9 shelf. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just stillness, the kind that settles after the storm finally moves on. I spent 3 days cleaning alone, no help. I didn't ask anyone to come by. I filled 11 trash bags, hired a junk removal guy who showed up late, then tried to flirt with me while tossing out moldy furniture. I power washed the back patio, ripped out the tarp-covered hot tub, and left it in pieces at the curb. I found Darren's receipts stuffed in a kitchen drawer, credit card statements, supplements, expensive shoes he never wore. Claire's closet was nearly empty, except for a crushed box labeled winter stuff, which was just a pile of scarves and a half-used candle. Abandoned the house. They tried to humiliate it, to stain it. Like, if they couldn't keep it, then it shouldn't be worth keeping. Was that this house wasn't just a building to me. It was every summer, a night I spent here when I was little, listening to Grandpa talk about how things were built right back in his day. It was the creak in the hallway that always meant he was up early. The drawer that stuck in the kitchen, the spot on the porch where the paint always chipped, no matter how many times he repainted it. They didn't destroy anything important. They couldn't because the Gashin house still stood, and now it stood empty. And mine. Monday, I reopened the file Grandpa left behind. The one he tucked in his private safe labeled Rebuild. I read through every page, notes, sketches, lists of repairs, savings accounts, contacts he trusted. He had it all laid out like a plan for a future he wasn't going to see, but hoped I would. And at the bottom of that file, I found something else. A letter. One I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't long. If they try to take this house, let them. People like that never hold on to things for long. They don't know how, and when they let go, you'll be here, like I always knew you would be. I read it twice, folded it neatly. Back. By the weekend, I had contractors lined up. The quiet kind local guys. People Grandpa had worked with before. I'd already moved into his old room. Desk, the books, the chair. I wasn't changing it. Not yet. The house needed work, but it had a heartbeat again. The bad energy had left with the moving trucks. I never spoke to Claire again. Parents didn't come around either. I think they were too embarrassed, too angry, or maybe just afraid I'd say what we all knew. I warned them. I warned all of them, but I didn't need to say anything. I had the house. Nothing. And I didn't have to lift a silent finger to take it back. They handed it over the moment they believed it was theirs. The first update. A few weeks passed. The house was mine again, inside and out. The contractors came through, like clockwork, patched the drywall, replaced the busted tiles in the braiding the self kitchen, removed the old carpeting upstairs, and cleaned out the vents, which hadn't been touched in years. The smell finally left. I replaced the blinds, painted over the scuffs, and even fixed the porch swing Grandpa built. For the first time since he died, it felt like something was finally moving forward. I didn't post about it, didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I kept it quiet, but news still got out. One morning, I was outside repainting the fence when Mrs. Jensen came by with a coffee and a soft smile. Heard Claire had moved in with one of Darren's friends across town. Darren was now couch surfing, blaming Claire for everything. She also said something that stopped me mid-stroke with the brush. Apparently, my father had tried to sue Claire. Money he'd loaned her for the Lexus, and the renovations that never happened. My mother had cut contact with both of them after that. Claire blocked them, and now no one in the family was speaking. They had imploded. But the surprise came too, days later in a manila envelope, delivered by courier. At first I thought it was more junk. Maybe something left over from the bank. But it wasn't. It was from Grandpa's old law firm. Inside was a final document I hadn't expected. Apparently, the third account, the one Grandpa left under my name, had a clause. If the house returned to my bland Juan, control and all debts were cleared, remainder of the account would convert to a private inheritance fund, not for repairs. For me, it was substantial. Much more than I expected. He hadn't just planned for me to take back the house. He'd planned for me to live, really live, once I did. Travel, if I wanted. Invest. Build something of my now own. No more fighting to hold the house together. No more bailing anyone out. That was the final part of the plan. He trusted me to protect the house, but he never intended it to be my prison. He just needed to make sure it ended up in the right hands, and now it had. I stood on the back porch that evening with a dance bed of wine, glass of wine, watching the sunset through the trees Grandpa planted 50 years ago. The yard was quiet, except for the faint sound of wind chimes he'd hung from the oak outback. They hadn't rung in a long time. But now, with the house silent, and still they did. Not loud, just enough. Enough to remind me that not everything has to be taken by force. Some things find their way back to you, the way they were always meant to, slowly, quietly, and completely.